Welcome to Post Whatever with Ken Nishikawa. Food. That's what Japan is famous for. Or so I have been told. Japanese food is sophisticated, delicate, intricate, healthy, zen, and so on and so forth. An entire thesaurus of flattering adjectives has been exhausted in its description. And frankly, there are already far too many podcasts, blogs, and YouTube channels devoted to the gastronomy of Japan, most of them fronted by suspiciously enthusiastic people who've been here for 6 months, or sometimes even 6 hours, and have just discovered conveyor belt sushi and everything at the convenience store is marvelous. But, yeah, whatever, that's good, that's cool. You know, I'm not here to discredit anyone. In this 4th episode, I attempt to debunk a few myths and, at the same time, introduce some of the more interesting corners of Japanese cuisine. And, being the vegetarian that I am, the emphasis falls heavily on vegetarian life in Tokyo. One question I'm frequently asked is, what's the vegetarian or vegan food experience in Japan actually like? My honest and objective answer, it depends. If you're a pescatarian, then no problems whatsoever. In fact, it's quite possibly as good as it gets, provided you're partial to traditional Japanese flavors and seasonings. If you're a strict vegan, however, prepare yourself for a culinary adventure that is, shall we say, character building. Now, the phrase traditional Japanese food is very much open to interpretation. So, when I use this term, I mean food and cooking methods that developed before the 1870s, pre-Meiji Japanese cuisine, if you like. Therefore, exclude dishes such as ramen, which only became widely popular in Japan in the early 20th century, arriving with Chinese immigrants in port cities like Yokohama in the 1880s. Some say ramen was introduced from China around 1665, but this is not supported by the historical record apparently. It would also exclude the latest Western favorite, katsu curry, which I suspect has now overtaken fish and chips in the British national consciousness. Bonito broth, or what the locals call dashi, is packed with umami and used almost universally in all traditional Japanese savory dishes. I liken it to parmesan or pecorino in Italian cuisine, an absolute essential that gives each dish its distinctive, irreplaceable character and umami. From miso soup to soba and udon noodles, bonito broth, often combined with kelp or kombu and dried shiitake mushrooms, is the very foundation of traditional Japanese cooking. Japanese chefs who can extract maximum umami from these ingredients are, in fact, in considerable global demand of late. Apparently, some Michelin-starred Nouveau Cuisine restaurants in Paris have been quietly headhunting Japanese dashi masters, and with the euro strong and the yen in condition best described as catastrophically humble, Japan's food industry is losing its talent at roughly the same rate as Gordon Ramsay loses his hair. At least Gordon can afford expensive transplants. Japanese restaurants, rather, cannot. It is, one might say, a hairy situation. So, what is the dining experience in Japan like for vegetarians such as myself, or for more committed vegans? The answer is tricky. Although vegetarian and vegan options have become considerably more available in recent years, thanks in large part to the surge of tourists from overseas, there is still a surprisingly limited awareness amongst the Japanese general public of what vegetarianism or veganism actually entails. For example, every time I mention that I don't eat meat or fish, the question I almost invariably receive is, what do you actually eat? Well, I mean, everything else. everything that isn't meat or fish, which, if you think about it, still leaves quite a lot. But most people here find it genuinely difficult to imagine a satisfying savory meal without some form of animal in it. Interestingly, Japan's per capita meat consumption is roughly half that of Western Europe, North America, and Australia. So it's not that Japanese cuisine is particularly meat heavy. In fact, I don't think it is. But it's just that seemingly every traditional savory dish uses a very small, very precious little amount of fish or meat. Not so much for substance, but, yes, you guessed it, for umami. Also, seemingly self-explanatory elements of vegetarianism or veganism often elude people. Even at a restaurant, when I tell the sweet, accommodating, very friendly chef that I don't eat fish or meat. Oh, no problems. We can prepare you a vegetable nimono or soba. Now, nimono being a simmered dish, very similar to French pot-au-feu, which, alongside soba broth, most certainly prepared with bonito stock. Speaking of bonito, there is a widespread tendency amongst Japanese people not to mentally classify bonito flakes as fish. They're simply an ingredient, a natural flavoring, like salt or pepper, except technically the dried, fermented, smoked flesh of a skipjack tuna. In some extreme cases, when I have explained at considerable length that I eat neither fish nor meat, the person enthusiastically and lovingly preparing my meal has looked up brightly and said, "Okay, so sausages are fine for you, yeah?" Not really. As a side note, vegetarian sausages are almost impossible to find in Japan, unless you go online, of course. This is not a complaint. It is simply a data point for those planning their trip accordingly. Whilst sometimes it feels like every other person is vegan or vegetarian in the United Kingdom, I rarely encounter an ethnic Japanese person based in Japan who identifies as vegetarian. On those exceptionally rare occasions when I do, they're usually pesco-vegetarian. And whereas many people in the West go vegan for ethical or environmental reasons, animal welfare, climate change, general moral clarity, and so on, Japanese vegans tend to be associated with specific religious movements or New Age spiritual communities with strict dietary codes. So, vegetarianism and veganism in Japan carry, shall we say, a slight image problem, which is, when you consider the history, rather ironic. Japan was, for over 1,200 years, a nation that officially did not eat meat. Yes, Japan was effectively a pescatarian and in significant ways vegetarian or vegan nation for over 12 centuries, from 675 AD when Emperor Tenmu issued his decree restricting meat consumption until the Meiji Restoration in the 1870s. The reasoning was Buddhist in principle. Taking life pollutes the soul. Animals might be reincarnated ancestors, and so forth. But remember, this is Japan, a country where not one, but 8 million gods are said to exist, which naturally means there is more than one standard and a great many ways to interpret any given decree. Much like modern billionaires who somehow find legal means to pay no tax, the ancient Japanese were remarkably creative at locating loopholes in imperial and Buddhist law. One aspect of Japanese grammar that confuses the speaker of Indo-European language is counters. Now, what are these counters, which sometimes referred to as measure words? Think of Japanese counters like the words you use in English for specific groups. For example, a loaf of bread, a slice of pizza, a pair of shoes, trousers, or a bunch of morons. In English, you usually just say 3 dogs or 5 books. In Japanese, however, you cannot just stick a number next to a noun. You almost always need a counter or measure word to act as a bridge between the number and the object. So, 4-legged mammals such as cows, pigs, sheep, the dedicated counter would be hiki or piki. So 1 pig, 2 pigs, 3 pigs would be like 1匹, 2匹, 3匹の豚. When the Japanese people count hares, however, instead of using the counter for mammals, hiki, the counter for birds, wa or ba, is applied. Why? Because of those generously hairy ears might perhaps, if you squint and are very hungry, be interpreted as their feathery wings, and hence hares are classified as not mammals but birds, and to emphasize the point, the counter for birds was adopted. And apparently that makes it perfectly suitable for human consumption with the gods and emperor and what have you. The other canonical example is wild boar. In defiance of all zoological evidence, people in the Edo period referred to boar as yamakujira, literally mountain whale. Since whale had always been perfectly acceptable to eat in Japan, in fact, they've been staple diet for the Japanese for centuries, and it remains so today, controversially. The word for boar in Japanese is inoshishi. The term yamakujira, mountain whale, was an invention, a convenient fiction, a masterpiece of culinary euphemism that would not be out of place in a modern government press release. I think people accepted the decree with a kind of wary pragmatism, sort of, it is what it is sort of way. I do not believe anyone genuinely feared divine retribution for eating mountain whale, or hare for that matter. The 8 million gods of Japan are not, after all, the stern of watchful monotheistic god of the Abrahamic traditions. They're much more like the gods of ancient Greece. Playful, capricious, and occasionally drunk, and largely preoccupied with their own dramas. And people didn't so much worship those gods as lodge occasional complaints about their negligence or even incompetence. Now imagine, if you will, complaining to God about his laziness or incompetence at the Christian church or mosque or synagogue. Now, on the most important subject, what of the contemporary vegetarian traveler to Japan? There are things to be aware of beyond the bonito question. In a British or American restaurant, you can generally ask a chef to prepare a dish without meat or fish, and unless it was already cooking or prepared with animal products beforehand, they will cheerfully oblige, right? This is not always the case in Japan. I mean, there are chefs who are willing to do it, but considerably less so. But I don't believe the reason is simply inflexibility. In a very good posh French restaurant, maybe Michelin star French restaurant, there are typically no condiment on the table. No salt, no pepper, nothing. Whereas at an American diner, for example, the table resembles the flight deck of an aircraft carrier in the Strait of Hormuz. It's got salt, pepper, ketchup, mustard, hot sauce, vinegar, possibly barbecue sauce, and a laminated card explaining how to use all of it. This difference reflects 2 entirely distinct philosophies of service, I think. In America, and to a slightly lesser extent in Britain, good service means giving the customer exactly what they want. The customer is always right. The customer is king. The customization, therefore, is a virtue, hence the condiment armada. On the other hand, in France, and most certainly in Japan, the chef is an artist. What arrives on your plate has been considered, composed, and seasoned to what the professional or the artist believes to be the impeccable specification, perfection. After all, you do not ask Picasso to make Guernica more colorful, do you? Unless you want to look like a complete pillock. For me as a vegetarian, this can occasionally be infuriating, I admit. But I also appreciate that these chefs, the fish or meat umami, is an integral part of the flavor universe they are creating. Anyhow, as I said at the outset, I'm trying to be as objective as possible here. If you're visiting Japan and are strict vegetarian or vegan, the safest option would be an Indian restaurant. And there are good ones in Tokyo too. There are also authentic, note the word authentic, Italian restaurants which typically carry a handful of vegetarian options, as you know. Though, be warned that the more Japanese-inflected Italian places have an unfortunate tendency to add bacon to, say, like the aglio, olio, peperoncino, apparently on the ground that it improves things. Extra umami. Well, obviously I don't agree, but everyone's entitled to believe what they want to believe. I am aware that traveling to Japan specifically to eat dal and naan bread or spaghetti pomodoro, running the risk of having some animal products that are not specified on the menu is, on some level, absurd. If what you seek is genuinely pure traditional and uncompromising Japanese vegan experience, there is one answer. Shojin ryori. Now, shojin ryori is the traditional Japanese Buddhist cuisine formalized and popularized in the 13th century by the Zen Buddhist monk Dogen, though its roots extend back to the arrival of Buddhism from China in the 6th century. Originally conceived as meals for monks in training, it avoids all animal products and, interestingly also, avoids strongly flavored ingredients like garlic and onions, which are considered too stimulating and potentially even aphrodisiac for the meditative mind. As far as the vegan meals go, shojin ryori to me is up there at the pinnacle, composed with great skill and presented as many small plates rather than a single large one. The chefs devote considerable effort to creating umami that matches or sometimes even tops the meat-based umami, which, speaking from my own experience, is very, very difficult to achieve. So everything is nice and rosy, except there are minor complications. Shojin ryori restaurants are few and far between, tend not to appear in provincial towns and are rather steep. They are concentrated in Kyoto, which is frankly considerably better for vegan dining experience than Tokyo in general, although Tokyo has a small and excellent selection as well. Vegan or not, if you have the opportunity, I would strongly recommend seeking one out. It is not merely a meal, it is an experience. So far, I attempted to highlight possible issues vegetarians may encounter in Japan, and I sincerely hope I haven't discouraged any of my fellow vegetarians or vegans from visiting Japan. The situation is improving, the vegan options are increasingly available, particularly in the larger cities. And of course, apps exist to help you find them. People are trying. It's just a bit sad that the most authentic, characterful, funky, no-nonsense Japanese establishments tend to be exactly the ones that don't cater for plant-based diets. I guess they're adamantly refusing to make any compromises with the tradition. And, I get it. Sort of. So this has been Post Whatever with Ken Nishikawa. If you found any of that remotely useful or even mildly diverting, do consider liking and subscribing. I'm told it is terribly important, though I confess I remain skeptical. Until next time, I'm Ken Nishikawa. Please do not let this rubbish program deter you from visiting Japan, even if you're a hardcore vegan. After all, life can be cruel everywhere.